Hi, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about Steven Pinker's most recent book, Rationality. The full title of the book is Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters. This is a library copy, and I want to begin by saying that I would not recommend this book. It's not a useful book. If you're interested in the topic, toward the end of the video, I'll recommend some alternative books that I believe are better. The book, I read it because I wanted to review it on the channel. I wanted to provide a short commentary on it. It is extremely boring, tedious, difficult to get through. When I was a psychology student, both during my undergraduate and during my graduate studies, I, on several occasions, tried reading books by Steven Pinker. I always found them kind of boring, but now I know enough to be able to think about why his writing is boring, why it is so tedious. And now I believe that the tedium, the boredom that we experience when we read Pinker is an indication of his approach. The main problem is that Pinker writes from within an ivory tower, from within a bubble that has severed his relationship as a writer, as a thinker, with important aspects of social reality, cultural reality, what is happening in the lives of most people. So that ivory tower does something to you if you are an academic who works, lives, writes from that, within that bubble. It protects you, that bubble protects you, but it also isolates you, and it removes certain mechanisms of feedback. It isolates you, but not just you, it also isolates and analyzes in an excessive manner your subject matters. So when you want to talk about rationality, you end up, even if you pick a topic originally that is worthwhile, that is important, you end up analyzing that subject matter into pieces that themselves have no significance, have no relevance on their own, and you're unable to put them back together for some practical purposes, because that force, it is a reality that forces you to put the pieces back together. If you are within that bubble, if you are within that ivory tower, you won't have any, you won't be required, you won't have any motivation to put the pieces back together and generate a coherent whole. His books, I should maybe add quickly here, his books on language are better, significantly better, in my opinion, especially his book, The Stuff of Thought. That's quite good. Maybe because the language is a topic that is safer to write about, to study from within universities, from within that context. Anyways, but as I said, the general place of writing that this book seems to have been written, it's been written within a context that is out of touch. And so we end up reading about not rationality, but some instruments of problem solving. And when Pinker uses examples to flesh out his ideas, he uses lifeless examples, abstract examples that like coin flips, rolling a bunch of dice, probability of a newborn child being a boy or a girl. And he, towards the end, does something that really irritated me. And he said that when you think about progress, social progress, cultural progress, if you inspect those movements of progress carefully, you will find that at the heart of them, and at the origin of, in the beginning of them, there's always a person making a cold, rational argument. So he gives us this image of an improvement in society, beginning with one person, presumably somebody like Pinker, sitting at their desk and crafting an argument. And to cite examples to support that idea, support that image, he includes the examples like Frederick Douglass, or Martin Luther King Jr., or Mary Wollstonecraft, or Mary Estelle, somebody I wasn't familiar with. But I know enough about these examples to know that their movements, what they initiated, their actions, did not start with having the luxury of sitting at a desk and writing some kind of cold, rational, abstract argument. Change for these characters, Frederick Douglass was a slave. He escaped from slavery. Change in these characters, in these examples, change begins with their lives, with their engagement, with their close, intimate contact with a problem that was real to them, that they were struggling with. Yes, at some point they had to go and write arguments to explicate what is going on and propose possible solutions, potential solutions, but it didn't start with cold reasoning or formal reasoning. It started with life and a loyalty to life, a vision of life, a vision of change, something much more intimate than a thinker, an academic sitting at a desk and writing, solving some abstract idea. Again, let me talk about something that wasn't bad about the book. So when Pinker approaches towards the beginning, in the beginning of the book, first 2 chapters, he talks about some instances where something looks irrational to us, like taboo topics or a stubborn religious belief, for example, that people don't want to shake off or they don't want to examine closely. He gives us a bunch of some examples that are apparently counterexamples of rationality. And it's useful that he points to those instances and he demystifies them and shows that there is a rationality in them. There's a rationality built into seeming irrational or seeming stubborn or being stubborn. Having certain prejudices, for example, there is a rationality to them. There's a telos in them. But these useful notes are on the margins of the book. They don't contribute much to the general line of argument, or if there is a general line of argument. In the beginning, he says something else that is quite good. I agree with. He says when he was beginning this project, which I think was also a course at Harvard, he wanted to teach a course on rationality, and he turned to typical syllabi on cognitive psychology, and he found them to be useless. I agree with that. I also think that Steven Pinker did not transcend that useless style. He superficially changed the syllabus. He changed it from attention, perception, which is the typical cognitive psychology syllabus, attention, perception, problem solving, creativity, blah, blah, blah. Abstract and removed, no relevance. And he changed the structure with new labels, like he included signal detection theory, game theory, but probability theory. That's not new. Paul Thagard did something very similar in his book on cognitive science. And he didn't overcome the essential problem, which is the isolation of each subtopic and the lack of a bigger picture, a bigger idea about what rationality is. But nevertheless, he identified a problem with cognitive psychology. All right, so Stephen, a few more problems with the book. His rhetoric is inconsistent. At some point, he says rationality is an inescapable phenomenon. It is something that we all need to employ. He says, do you want things or you don't? If you do want to get things, if you do want to pursue goals, then rationality is what you need to use. And if you don't use rationality, you can't get what you want. Okay, so it's very widely accessible to all of us. But at different points in the book, he says rationality is an achievement. It's a rare, almost miraculous achievement of white people who are educated, living in industrialized, rich and democratic, the so-called weird people. It's a rare achievement of these kinds of weird people. So we should protect that miracle, that rare achievement. So which one is it? he uses different images. He gives us different pictures of rationality at different points in the book to for rhetorical purposes, but they don't really hang together. He's also inconsistent conceptually. He says rationality is a set of tools, like the tool of game theory, and then the tool of probability theory, the tool of signal detection theory. But rationality must be more than that. It must be also about when using those tools is appropriate, when using game theory is called for, when it is not called for. Shouldn't that be part of rationality? If not, then where do we get that from? The appropriate use of each one of these tools. At other points in the book, he does get close to saying that rationality is more than just these set of tools. And when he talks about rationality being a moral virtue, and yeah, of course I agree with that, but he doesn't really get into that aspect of it. That's why his own use of these instruments of the so-called instruments of rationality is inappropriate on several occasions. When he talks about the George Floyd incident, when he talks about the critical race theory as a response to that, he says that incidents like the George Floyd incidents are surprisingly rare. So we are overreacting to them. The way we are reacting to them right now is out of proportion. That is a misuse or an inappropriate use of probability. Don't you care about a structural flaw in a culture, in a society, something having to do with how society is organized that allows for certain brutal forms of unfairness? For example, remember, there is a short book by Shirley Jackson called The Lottery. And that story gives us an image of something that happens very rarely, one person being tortured to death. Not typically, very rarely, maybe once a year. And because it is so rare, we shouldn't pay attention to it. But if that flaw is systemic, then that system should be thought about, should be examined, re-examined, regardless of how rare the problem is or how frequent the problem is. The problem, first of all, is not rare as Pinker would like us to believe. And even if it is rare, as long as a problem indicates a systemic flaw, a systemic weakness, it deserves our attention. Don't you want to know, for example, if a nuclear reactor has a small chance of exploding and killing everybody in the vicinity? It's rare. It happens very rarely, but if you live nearby, aren't you interested in it? Okay. Steven Pinker pays lip service to some of the really important topics, including a topic called ecological rationality. So that's how he refers to it. Ecological rationality refers to the idea that rationality is not just internal to the mind of the agent, but it arises from the interaction between an ecology, an environment, and the agent. And a rational process emerges as a feature of a relationship between agents and each other, maybe a community of agents, and then that community and the environment within which they live. Exploring that theme further, if you get deeper into that, you might end up thinking about themes or topics including hermeneutics, which I think are more useful in championing rationality in our time than what Pinker is doing, like giving us back these instruments of rationality that are ultimately disinterested in the well-being of our fellow human beings. Doesn't sound right. Is that what rationality is? People within ivory towers, disinterested, writing books about signal detection theory and how, we shouldn't demand more from, or we shouldn't demand what we are demanding from our justice systems. Just doesn't sound right. You cannot, the book demonstrates that you cannot live within a bubble, protected bubble, and be a source of progress. and be a champion, a true champion of progress. I promise to give some recommendations at the end. So I would recommend any book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. This the book series beginning with The Black Swan, then The Anti-Fragile and Skin in the Game. There's a very short book by Jan Elster. I have recommended and reviewed that book on my channel, Reason and Rationality. Jan Elster talks about how we should think about rationality as a concern with the common good, or reason. He talks about reason as that. That's a really effective definition. If you like a popular, accessible introduction to rationality and its problems, I have also discussed Julia Galef's book on rationality. That's also good. Better than Steven Pinker's book. All right. If you have any questions, if you disagree with me, please let me know. Unlike Steven Pinker's Twitter account, my comment section is open. I welcome disagreements and negative feedback and criticism. So if you have any of those, please feel free to share them. Otherwise, take care and until next time.